we're rolling and
Sorry. I'm like, I got a little drainage.
yeah, what do you think that's from?
Let's not analyze. Let's get going. Give the people what they want. Go. Oh, golly. Welcome.
Go ahead, open us up.
Stop it.
Welcome to Emotionships, where we talk about the real reason everything happens for a reason. I'm your host, Charlie Carroll, along with my causative co-host, Mallory Redmond.
Huh? Hold on.
Causative. Are you going to check that out to see if I'm...
Well, you're confident enough that it must be an actual word, but
Yes.
what is it?
You cause effects. You affect.
Acting as a cause.
Yeah. How's that?
I don't.
Welcome to the program, Mal. How are you this morning, apart from your drainage?
I'm fine. I'm trying to figure out
So
causative.
you know Mondays are my self-care
we're
days.
Moving forward. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you're causative. You'll get there.
Mondays are your self-care days.
Yes. And so I happened to be getting a massage this past Monday, and the oddest thing happened. I was laying there. The massage therapist had finished, and just a feeling of the overall energy in the room came over me, and I was actually pretty surprised and happy about it at the same time. That I'm working as an energy person to try to be more aware, more present wherever I am, and therefore more aware of the energy. And it was just it reminds me, when you look at constellations, sometimes people will show you just the overall, you'll see as things, how they move through the sky, like the energy, and it'll be highlighted in different colors, like how energy moves. Sometimes you can see that when looking at the constellations. And I was just laying there and felt the overall energy in the building, in the room. And I was like, oh, this is good. This is a new thing.
Okay. Back up. What do you mean? What do you mean? What are you talking about with the sky? Like when people highlight constellations?
Well,
you see the Big Dipper?
That, but you can see, I need to look up the name for it. Maybe we can put it in the notes, but just you can see energy moving through space.
I don't get it.
Well, it was a picture. You don't have to get it.
Oh, okay.
But nevertheless, I like I said, I'm working on being more present wherever I am and not allowing myself to be controlled and pulled out of any environment based on who's in that environment or where I am. And it's so helpful.
Okay, so what did you feel? The massage ended. Suddenly you realize that you're feeling the energy of the building.
In the building, within the building, which buildings have energy. People, obviously whole shows have been made about ghosts and people's spirits in a home, which I think is a real thing.
Oh, yeah. My aunt, literally every house she's in, they follow her. I'm not kidding you. I could tell you some really crazy stories.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I have similar stories from friends where just these spirits seem to either want to follow them or not leave the residence that they're in. Mm-hmm. Funny story, my sister will tell you this one, that we always had something in the house that we grew up in where you would hear late at night, particularly between a certain time, the boards moving. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't help but think it was something. And so one time I thought I would be funny, and I was up really late and she had already gone to bed. So I decided to put a sheet over me, and I army crawled into her room and stood on the end of her bed and waited for her to see me without saying anything. And I just had this long sheet over me, and I don't know that she listens to this podcast, but somebody will tell her to listen in on this. For probably 15 years, she told the story of the ghost that stood at the end of her bed. And it took me until I was in my mid to late 20s to tell her that was really me.
You held on for 15 years.
Oh, because it was such a great story.
Wow.
I love listening to her tell it.
You are the most little brother.
Ever.
That's the most little brother thing in the entire world.
It was so great.
How annoying.
Yeah. But
How long did you stand there? 15 years?
Probably 5 to 10 minutes, and just waited, right? Like I put my foot on the mattress and kind of tried to move it to get her.
Sure. And so what, she woke up and saw you and screamed and you ran out?
She woke up and saw me, and I think she put herself under the covers, and I slowly let myself down because I knew that the way to make this thing great was like you had to get out of there the same way you got in.
Sure.
So like if you appeared, you have to disappear in order. And it was so good over time. But that being said, like, you know, we are spirits with bodies. We're not bodies with spirits. We tend to process our life as bodies with spirits, but honestly, we are all eternal spirits with bodies. And the quicker you realize that, you know, you can dive into this whole idea of energy and motion, which is this program.
I've gone into people's friends of mine who have like recently moved into a new home.
Yeah.
And I've gone with them and into the house because there's already energy in there, right? Like who knows the stories and the experiences of the people that lived in there prior to them.
Sure.
And so gone through and like prayed through the house and even just like listen to what the energy is like. Cause oftentimes they just feel something. They don't know exactly what they feel, but it's discomfort in their own home. And so I'm like, well, that's super real. Like many people have lived here before you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's documented. I mean, even if you go into the Old Testament, when the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt and going into, you know, now Israel, you know, what was called the promised land for them, one of the instructions that they are given with certain tribes is don't save their homes, you know, dismantle them because of what was in them, because of the spirits that those Midianites, in this case, served. And so you were to cleanse that home instead of just stepping into it. And people do not realize it. And over the last 15 years, we've done a lot of this where kids will be having nightmares, or certain things are happening and people can't sleep. And you go in and sense energetically or spiritually what is in that home. And you, quote unquote, you know, use words which are more energy to clear those environments. And I mean, the results are absolutely unbelievable. And people are like, I don't know if I believe that's true. Well, there are a lot of things in life that don't depend on you believing they are true. And so if we continue to think that we have to believe something in order to not be affected by it, then we are the ones that suffer for that. And so the spiritual realities that are in a home, you know, even of the people that were building the home, let alone, you know, I've been with families where they've lost a child and then they grieve in that home. And, you know, people step into that and that stuff stays. As you study the quantum realm and quantum physics and understand that everything, absolutely everything, is a different level of density of energy, then you realize that, you know, our thoughts, our feelings all affect our environment.
Okay. Yes, I agree. Can you say more about after your massage? I mean, you really glossed right over that.
Yeah. Well, so the interesting thing is that I felt like a heaviness, like a mourning, like somebody crying and being sad and heavy hearted. And I just felt it like almost like a current go across from, it would have been from the east side of the room to the west side of the room and just move across me. And my first thought was like, oh, this is good. This is new. This is a new level of awareness and it's something that I'm after. And then my thought was, okay, what were those feelings? Like, let's identify them, which we will put in the notes. You and I have been working off of an emotion wheel that has 7 root emotions. And then it moves outward into 2 like ripples that go from a primary emotion to this is how I'm feeling it or how it makes me feel. And we'll share that. And that's how you and I basically put everything on a map and use it so we can be consistent with it. And so I asked myself the question, like, okay, what is this? And it was fear. Like if I use our wheel, the root emotion was fear. And then I just like, okay, well, I'll acknowledge it, which is pretty much what you have to do with energy in the room. And the reason why you acknowledge it, for those of you that are listening and are curious about this, is because if you acknowledge it, that it's in the room and it's not yours, then you don't inherit it.
So how did you know it's not yours?
Because I just ask myself, like, I can do a simple test where I just put my hand on my heart, and if it goes away, that energy goes away, it's not mine. If it stays, then it could be mine. And it's not overly uncommon for you to have a feeling and not know where it's coming from. Like, oh, I'm sad. And you feel it before your mind processes it. And we've said that before several episodes back when we were talking about the field, the energetic field that surrounds your heart. That picks up on energy in the room more than your mind does. Your mind is the processor. And that's one of the problems that we have in the North American way of doing things, that it's quickly going around the globe, that it's all about like processing and intellect, when that's just like maybe 20% of your existence is your processing of it. And so, like, just take an example. If a 5-year-old who's playing basketball and really likes it walks into a NBA game and is watching what's happening, they are at the same game that LeBron James or whomever the player is, Steph Curry, but Steph or LeBron process it. They see different things, right? And so just because your intellect shows up doesn't mean that you're picking up on all of the energy and what's happening in the room. And professional sports is just one thing, but like even take music. The person that's just beginning to play the guitar versus like Eric Clapton or a great guitarist.
Wow, I haven't heard that name in a really long time.
Well, he's a great guitarist.
Of course, yeah.
And so, the way he thinks about the exact same thing that person that's just starting with it in their hands, the intellect can grow. And so we get trapped in this country, and there, almost every person listening to this, or really every person listening to this, is severely affected by the water that they were raised in, which is processing everything through intellect versus energy. And if we're actually eternal spirits with a body, we actually need to become more familiar with energy that runs through our intellect versus intellect that processes energy. Mm-hmm. And so in that situation, I just, it like rushed over me. And you can get to this point where you are this aware. Psychedelics, mushrooms and ecstasy and are growing, and they're going to become the way of the future, all because of what they have the ability to do with the mind, slowing the mind down. It used to be a lot easier to get there without herbs and different plants from the earth, because life was so slow. Now the pace in which we live and the infiltration of synthetic compounded pharmaceutical drugs, we've lost the ability to slow our minds down. And that's why psychedelics are becoming very popular for just recreational use, but then also for treating depression and other medical issues, because a lot can happen when you become aware. Mm-hmm. And so I got up, put my clothes on, used the bathroom, and went out to the desk where my massage therapist was. And she said to me, hey, I'm not going to be here for, normally I go on Monday. She goes, I'm not going to be here next Monday, but I'll see you in 2 weeks. I said, oh, okay. I said, what's going on next Monday? And she said, well, my husband is having open heart surgery and he needs a new valve. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. I'll, pray. When is it? And she said, well, it happens on Friday and then he's going to recover. And she goes, I'm really like anxious about it. And right then I knew that was the wave. Mm-hmm. And actually the way the wave came across me is she, thinking back on it, she pulled the door shut behind her and walked from east to west, walked by the room. And so I felt her energy move with her, because now she wasn't focused on me. She was focused on, right. And that went back to dominating her energy. Mm-hmm. And, the reason why this is important, and like my little trick, when I'm working on people at Body Garage, when I feel something like shame or even a physical pain in my lower back, I will put my hand on them, and then I'll say, okay, is this theirs? And I'll leave my hand off my chest. And then I'll say, just to be sure, I'll put it on my right hand on my chest if my left hand is on them. And I'll say, or is this mine? Well, if I put my right hand on my chest and it goes away, it's theirs. And that's just something that, I've learned over 10 years of doing this work. And again, the reason why this is so important, if you're listening and you struggle with depression, heaviness, anxiety, fear, is because most of the time it's not yours. You're walking into an environment, or even, and people think I'm crazy in saying this, but if you become aware and you do a little bit of research yourself, which is what you're going to have to do, I can't do it for you, you will figure out that you can eat food that was made by somebody that was anxious and you become anxious. There's a lot of science out there looking and studying like the molecular structure of tears to show that you can see the shape inside the water of tears to get the emotion that those tears are letting out. I forget the name of the Japanese scientist that used sand and water to measure the beauty of words, and it's up on my blog, and I don't even remember what the title of it was, but he would use sound and use words like love versus words like hate, and use vibration to put those put the sand or the water underneath a microscope and show you literally that there is life and death in words. And so my energy comes out of, there's a field that comes out of my body that affects everything that I'm around. And so, the reason why this is so important is because we have lost the ability, 99.9% of people have lost the ability to differentiate their energy from the energy that's around them. And when you lose that ability, that energy becomes yours. You become a bitch to the energy that is around you. And what's so sad is so many people spend their life wearing energy that is not theirs, that becomes theirs because they did not know how to find or be aware of the difference.
Yeah. Yes, all of that makes a lot of sense. I also think, I don't feel like this is pushing back, but maybe it is. I don't know. Who cares? But I think a lot of times for boys and girls that turn into men and women, we're told like to be strong and not feel feelings.
Yeah, for sure.
And so like I am very, especially in this season of my life, I am very, I don't know, just like tender, and tears come very easily to me. Like I can be in the middle of a conversation with somebody and like I start like welling up with tears talking about whatever they're going through or I'm going through or whatever. And like yesterday, for example, I went on a run and like I couldn't stop crying. And I didn't know exactly why I was crying, but I just like let myself cry and figured like, I'll figure this out. Like I'll come to the reasoning at some point, but right now, like my body needs to expel tears. And so I'm going to let it. And it makes me think a lot about my kids because they're at ages right now where they feel big feelings and they don't know why, or they can't communicate why. And so I'm really trying to let like, okay, Evie, like be mad, like feel be sad, feel what you need to feel. And like, we'll talk about it later, because I'll say like, what's wrong? Why are you mad? And she doesn't know.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a fine line of like, yes, not every emotion is yours or you can have control of it. And also like boys need to be able to cry.
Yeah.
Men need to be able to cry. Like girls need to be able to cry and not be called a drama queen.
Yeah.
Because I think in our society, especially, like emotion is, it's just so, it has to be so boxed in order to be culturally appropriate.
Yeah. I could not agree more. And I think displaying your emotions in the right environment at the right time, like, is a sign of strength and health. Do you feel like you were afforded that opportunity, or how was that as you were being raised, as you demonstrated emotion in your home?
I know I grew up believing I was very dramatic.
Yeah.
In my home and in my friendships, like I would have like explosive feelings, which my daughter very much, Evie is very much like me. And I want to be like, you're being so dramatic, you know?
Sure.
And I really try to stop myself because she's just feeling feelings and she's expressing them in the way that Evie was created to express them.
Well,
Obviously, it's not always socially appropriate to like have a big outburst, but I'm trying to give her the space to feel what she needs to feel without her feeling shame, because that's not like, her and I are very prone to shame. And so I feel like I need to express my feelings in the way that everybody around me thinks I should express them, or else I'm going to be ashamed.
Yeah. So I happened to be with Ev last night. And you were not around, but Darren was.
Yep.
And it was a little birthday party for my daughter. And Ev was sitting next to Kate as Kate was opening her gifts. And she reached over in curiosity with a bow and pulled it, and it came off the package. And instantly, like, her chin dropped, and she looked around just like really slowly to see who saw that, because obviously she's smart enough to know that that's not supposed to come off, or she's not supposed to be the one doing it.
Right.
And so as she went back and forth, she saw my eyes that I saw her, and basically like just stared at me for a minute to see like if she was going to get in trouble for doing what she did. I'm like, it's okay. You're fine. And then instantly she just like kind of put it back and started playing with it again. Here's the thing about young children. They have a limited vocabulary. And I think one of the things that parents do not understand is when children have a limited vocabulary, there is a lot of room for frustration and therefore anger with the children, which responds in some sort of fit because they can't communicate how they're feeling. And so this is what I'm saying, because grown adults still do this. We get into environments where we sense and we feel something, but because we think the intellect has to understand or be aware of it, that pressure builds up on the inside of us, and all of a sudden we're driving home and we're angry, we're frustrated, we want to give up, and we have no idea why, that it was someone else's energy in the environment we just left. And so I think about this in light of, the poverty alleviation work that we do. When people don't have the ability to express themselves, which words are a gift, language is a gift. And the better you are with language and words and expressing yourself, the healthier you will be, because you can communicate through some of these feelings. And, in a lot of cases in this country, we're willing to give, coats and food and $5 here or there. But what the poor actually need is our time. We say that the poor are not a problem to be solved, but a people to be joined. And the reason why that is so true is because it is our energy, it is the life that is within us that other people need. And we need some of their energy, and they need some of our energy. And it's a language that we form and we build together. And so when we live our life as if everything is intellectually driven and can be interacted with or responded to, we end up just causing more problems, because we don't have the ability to walk into a room or to pick up a sandwich and realize like, okay, there's something different about what's going on here. And, I always think of like Star Wars and different movies or books that I've read that focus on this idea of the force or the energy that is all around us, that is actually shaping the way we feel, and therefore the way we think, which basically forms who we are. And so you will either be a byproduct of your environment, or you will learn how to identify the energy that is in the room and be able to take a lot more control back. And so, an emotionship is our energetic relationship to every other relationship in our life. And it's why we talk about finding the energy in the room or in any given situation, because that's the only way you change things, it is to figure out where's the energy at. And most people dance, with the manifestation or the outcome of the energy versus getting into the actual energy itself that is driving that situation.
So what are we changing when you say that's how we change things?
Well, take the massage as an example. I could have just walked out of there sad, or if I was unaware of it, like, man, I feel heavy. I shouldn't feel heavy after, a self-care day.
Right.
But I was able to ask a question. It made me aware enough that I was able to ask a question when she said, "Oh, hey, I'm not going to be here." That allowed me to say, "Oh, maybe there's a connection here. Why?" And then she told me, which now I can speak out positive words about her husband's surgery and over her and her worry and fear. Like she even acknowledged, she said, like, I'm really worried about it.
Sure.
And that allows me to be a part of and bring a positive difference as I speak out positive words over her and her husband going through that situation. And so the thing about energy in any given room is it can be changed. And so we're going to be victims of it, or we're going to be change agents of the energy in the room. And again, it really starts with differentiating between, okay, this is what I feel and it's real, but it's not me. I don't have to walk underneath this or wear this. I can get my head above this.
Okay. So, but so being change agents, like, I guess that's where I'm getting tripped up is I don't think, and maybe you're not saying this, but I don't think negative emotions always need to be ran away from. Like, I think that's super unhealthy.
No, for sure. I don't think negative emotions need to be ran away from either. I don't think there is a negative emotion if we acknowledge it and then ask where it's coming from. Then it becomes positive in the sense that it's moving me in a better direction. Using the massage therapist or that room as an example, if all I do is feel it and then I own it because I think everything that I feel is mine, then I just perpetuate and keep the negative or sad emotion going, and I don't benefit from it, or I don't have the opportunity to change it into a positive like happened for me.
So is an emotion ever just yours, or is it always one that you're picking up from something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Of course. So all of us have the receiving and the producing ability when it comes to emotions. So let's say that, I spill coffee on my pants as I'm coming into work, and like it irritates me because whatever, I don't want to walk around with a stain on my pants for important meetings or whatever it is, or somebody bumps me or cuts me off or whatever it is. Other people will produce behavior that I have a chance to own that emotion. And it could be my own fault, right? A song can come on the radio that reminds me of a different time in my life where I feel like I was treated unfairly. And then all of a sudden I have an angry emotion because I remember what was done to me. What is so important is that we all start to understand that there are these stimulating thoughts and that create feelings, but we don't have to. We are the one that is responsible for our feelings. And so I was saying that to one of my children today as they were anxious going to school because they have a big math test.
Oh gosh, that makes me anxious.
Well, for sure. I was a very anxious student myself, and they were crying, and I just said to them, like, why are you crying? And they said, Dad, school is so stressful. And I said, okay, I understand. I appreciate you saying that, but let me tell you something. Stress is not the environment we are in. Stress is not what we have to do. Stress is not what gets in our way. Stress is how we respond to it. We create stress by our thoughts with what we're up against. And so if you're not okay with your best response in the moment to what you're up against, then you create stress. So the word stress is uncertainty. And all of life is full of uncertainty. The only time it's not is when you're ignorant of it. Like you sat down in that chair, you thought it was going to hold you, and so you did not stress about it because it was not uncertain to you. But there is still uncertainty in that chair, whether you know it or not. All of life is full of uncertainty. We are just more aware of some uncertainty, stress, than we are other uncertainties. And so what I was saying to my child is like, your best, I'm telling you as your parent, your best is good enough. If you go in and take that math test and get absolutely none of the answers right, but yet you can tell me you did your best, I'm cool with it. And so in that specific example, I'm telling you, you don't have to stress about this. There is nothing uncertain about the math test. You will say to me, there is uncertainty because I don't know how I'm going to do. But I'll go one floor underneath you and say the foundation for you taking that test is your best is good enough. And if you do your best and the results aren't there, then you're fine. I was, I'm on some thinking board at their school. This is the first time I've done it. And yesterday I was on a 2-hour conference call and we were talking about this. The idea was, in light of the pandemic, what are some things that we can learn from it in order to make the school better in the future? And one of the things that we really landed on, what are the certainties? What are the things that we don't want to compromise versus focusing on how did this pandemic create new behavior? We got there and we talked about those things, but what we really lived into was, okay, what are some things that we know have to stick around about the school's culture? And one of them was the commitment to growing deep and diverse relationships. Well, the reason why I mentioned that is because in the example of my child taking this math test, what I wanted him to understand is that might just be one giant. Like the math test is his giant today. And there's 330 million people that all have some sort of giant in this country that they're going to face today. The real giant is how you're processing what you're up against and what your response is. And I just went around in a 5-minute loop to come back to what you asked me. We are the ones that own our feelings based on what we're up against. And in being aware of them and owning them and realizing like, okay, this is what I'm feeling based on what I'm up against, but I don't have to surrender to that. I just have to acknowledge that and realize that me acknowledging that can make this room or this conversation or this relationship better because I realize that it's there and I'm going to have the feelings that this situation is creating serve me versus be like some sort of chain that holds me down or holds me back and weighs me down.
Yes, I agree. I still think, and maybe you didn't, the way that you asked the question made it sound like you were not encouraging the tears of your child.
Yeah.
I mean, the feelings have to be expressed.
Sure.
Yours are not. They can be, I think they definitely need to be acknowledged. I'm 100% on board with that. I think that's life-changing to be able to even acknowledge them. But they're still going to be in you.
Yeah.
And so I would say it has to get out somehow.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, that's not one thing, as you know, that I'm great at and that I'm trying to get better with is expressing or letting, like, I'm trying to overcome a mentality that I was raised with where expressing emotion was weak.
Right.
It wasn't.
Oh, there's nothing that pisses me off more.
Yeah.
I think it's so detrimental to men and women. And
Yeah, very much so.
For the duration of their lives. And so and I think it begins with acknowledging the emotion. Is it mine? Is it yours? Where did it come from? But then you have to be allowed to, that's why sometimes when Evie starts screaming, I'm like, I get it. I mean, we've talked about that before, the vagus nerve,
Sure.
You got to let it out.
Yeah.
But it's more productive to let it out when you know what you're letting out. But I still think scream, cry.
Sure.
I mean, there has to be room for expression of the emotion, not just I'm taking control of this and I'm going to be okay.
No, I agree. And it comes across as robotic if it's said that way. I think being okay with expressing your emotion and, cultivating an environment or a culture within the workplace or the home that acknowledges that it's healthy to let those emotions out and not say things like, hey, suck it up. Why are you being such a baby? Those things aren't helpful. But at some point in time, after acknowledging it and being comfortable in it, you've got to get to a place where it's your math test really isn't the problem. Your math test is an opportunity for you to realize that you're living into a message that says, if I don't do this well on this test, I am not as valuable. I am not as important or significant. And so what I wanted with my child was to say, okay, there is some sort of pressure that you are living under because you are creating it. If your parents who are responsible for you and even your teacher say, just show up and do your best, and you do that, then you have to acknowledge that you have erected some sort of false wall or standard for yourself that's going to make you valuable, which really is just going to make it harder for you to learn and obtain information, staying with this specific situation. But, I'm reading a little bit of Anthony DeMello's like awareness book and a couple other of his works. And one of the things that he said recently was that like he was using the parable that Jesus uses with the banquet where the master of the banquet, which represents Jesus, says, hey, I invited all of these guests and they're too busy. They're doing their own thing. Go out and invite the poor and those that are in the highways and byways, which represent, those that didn't necessarily have their life together. And what Tony DeMello says there is that those are the people that when those situations stand in front of you are a gift to you, because when a person that I deem to be less than is standing in front of me, it really pulls my thoughts about value, specifically with them, out of me. Mm-hmm. And that's where the real gift is that, he said, think of the person that irritates you the most and now put them in front of you. What feelings do they create in you? And then he says, you need to understand that you are the one. That feeling does not exist in them. Other feelings might, but that feeling exists in you. And what we don't understand or what we seem to have lost as a society is that what other people do does not matter. What other people do will create feelings and thoughts in us. We are the ones that still own those thoughts and feelings. And we can dramatically change our life and the environments that we're in by taking responsibility for the feelings that other situations or other people might stimulate, but we don't let them dominate us. And when we do let their actions dominate our mood and our feelings, which creates a reaction, we're as guilty as they are.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that is such a power play. Like, what a life hack.
Sure.
To be able to, that's, and it's so conditioned in us. Like, I think of the story you told about Evie, where she did something that she felt was wrong, and she looked around the room to see what other people were, how they were reacting. I mean, she's 2.5. Yeah. She's not even 3 years old. She already knows that she believes that her worth or her value is kind of on a scale based on how other people are reacting to her actions. It's amazing. And she's 2.5. And I still do the same thing today. When I'm speaking, when I'm leading a meeting, when I walk into a room, it's like, how are you receiving me? Because that's going to tell me how to feel about myself. It's the craziest thing.
Well, we don't understand that we're all attached, right? Entanglement and attachment. Like, we're all attached. People do not exist outside of another person. Yeah. If you think of the movie Castaway, like he had to turn a volleyball into another person in order to give himself some sort of mirror to reflect who he is. And so you don't exist outside of community.
Yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just thought of a question.
Yeah.
So how do you, what you just said about like their feelings about you are their feelings. How do you operate within relationship without becoming like a complete narcissist, or while allowing people to shape us and grow us? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that it's important to understand that, first of all, start with the idea that 98% of what we fear does not happen to us. And the older I get and the more businesses I'm involved with and the more people I meet on a regular basis and interact with, the more I realize I don't get it right, and that my brain as a protection mechanism projects the worst about people. And so the magic in Jesus teaching about death is that all life starts with death, and you can't really live if you're afraid to die. That when you lose your fear of dying, whether it's with your physical body or just with 1,000 little acts from other people, when you lose the fear of things being taken from you, you can actually start to live. And so, most of what you're suspecting negatively, this is the thing that people don't understand. And they're 40, 50, 60 years old, and they still keep projecting the worst, that someone is out to get them or is going to take something from them. And that puts them in a defensive posture and into fight or flight, where the blood stays in the back of their brain and they can't enjoy their life and they're miserable. And it's sad.
I've had to tell myself before, like, Mal, you're not that important. Like,
Sure.
you're not that special. People are not spending 24/7 thinking about you.
For sure.
Get over yourself.
But the brain makes us think that's the case. And so if you just start there and you live in a way that you're okay with being betrayed, you know that it can happen. It's not going to happen that often. And B, you free yourself up to be present and actually enjoy your life versus living in a defensive posture that has very little benefit to it. And so if you'll start there, getting to answer your question with just being open and not afraid of loss, you're going to receive a lot more. The other side of it is most people are doing the exact same thing that you're doing, and that is they are aspiring to get to some sort of place where they feel like their life has value and meaning to it. It's the quest for meaning. And so, me owning the fact that my feelings about what someone else does tends to set me free and make me realize that my brain and all of my anatomy works to try to understand what's going on around me. And that is affected by how I respond to those things. And so, like, your processor is a part of you. And so the unhealthier you are, the less effective your processor is going to be. And so I have to understand that when I get into a negative cycle of analyzing other people's behavior, all I'm ever going to see is the negative. We say here on the podcast, the real reason everything happens for a reason. We have people that we know of in our life that negative thing after negative thing after negative thing always happens to them. And that's because energy is real, and you attract the same level of energy that you live in. And so if you live at a low negative energy, you will always attract low negative energy to yourself. Mm-hmm. If you practice gratitude, gratitude is that receiving posture. If you give me $1 million or a car, or you buy my lunch and it picks my energy up and I get excited about it, that is a receiving posture. And so it's not faking it and just putting out a fake energy. It's learning to look around you and realize, a couple of weeks ago, you and I spent a number of days at the hospital in the intensive care unit with someone here from the church. And like, I would walk by all of those rooms and see people literally with machines helping them breathe and gasping for air. Mm-hmm. You don't need another damn thing to be filled with gratitude and thankfulness today. You don't need another thing. No matter where you're at or what you're dealing with, you don't need another thing to be grateful and thankful for where you are. When I realize that raises my vibe and it attracts higher vibing things to me. Funny story. There is, I was just on a business trip for 2 weeks, and there's a watch that I've been watching. I've been looking for.
This is a funny story.
For over a year. And I this is the way it works with me and watches. Mm-hmm. I thought to myself, like, man, I still have not been able to find that a year later. And this company released a new version of it that basically they do that the year after they release it. And I thought, I was prompted to call the company and go straight to the company and say, hey, and it's a very limited piece, so they have very few of them. I said, hey, do you have any of these? And I just responded to the nudge. And basically, they had one left, and I ended up buying it. And it's all because, like, and this has happened so many times with me. Like, when you get into a posture where you can think positively about certain things, it ends up opening doors and bringing those things to you. And someone would say, well, why don't we just do that with everything? Like, I want a bigger house or a nicer car, or, I want that right person in my life. Because you can't fake it. Your vibe has to have integrity behind it, that you're naturally grateful, and that's inspiring new behavior in you in order to attract it to you. Every single time I've had a thought about a specific watch, I don't think I have to have that to be happy. I just think like, oh man, it would be nice to have. And the crazy thing about this is an expensive watch. And literally within one day, another business opportunity came along that the profit from that paid for this watch in the same 24-hour period. And it's just the way energy works. And, there are times where I'll be called to give one of these watches away, and they're expensive, and I don't think twice about it, because I've learned to just let it flow in and flow out. And I just operate with and interact accordingly to what I feel like I'm supposed to do. In Christian language, we would say, well, that's the Holy Spirit speaking to you. Other energy environments would say something different, like karma, or like just go with the energy. We're all describing the same energy, and there's different things and beliefs about how to interact with it and the personal component to it, and that's a whole different podcast. But the idea is you've got to get yourself to a place, even when you're in a negative situation, where you start to differentiate your emotions from the emotions in the room with that other person, with the food in front of you, or what have you, in order to start becoming more aware. And as you're more aware, you can be more intentional about the energy in your life, which leads to raising it, which is going to make everything better.
You said a lot.
Yeah, I tend to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think it can be really just being very, very, very honest. Sometimes it can be very frustrating. Like I tend to think of myself as a pretty positive person.
Sure.
I don't have, it's not impossible for me to see like the upside of a thing, of any situation. But sometimes, like the story you just told about your watches, I'm tempted to be like, stuff like that doesn't happen to me. Like that's that's on a plane that I am not yet on, like financially, any of that. I'm not there. And obviously there are great things that happen in my life, but I think it can be really tempting, to be honest, just to be like, that person always, like it always happens for that person. And then it can be really discouraging to think like, well, am I not positive enough? Am I not happy enough? Am I not grateful enough? And I think there are seasons where maybe it is a little bit more radio silent in terms of the things that you were just describing, because like there's growth there. But it's really hard to not get into a level of comparison of like, well, call it what you want. The Holy Spirit, whatever, like is always working in their lives. There's always doing something in their lives. And they're like #blessed with all of these things. They've got the house, they've got the car, they've got the accessories. And like, I want to pay a hospital bill off, you know? And then to just think like, well, I'm not grateful enough. It feels like kind of a kick in the gut.
Yeah. So a couple things. Let's start there. Let's start with the person that's listening to this and like, son of a bitch. Here he goes again talking about.
Shut up, Charlie, about your dumb watches.
Yeah, I don't want to hear another thing. I'm done. I'm out. Let's start there with that person. First of all, well, we'll start with that person in a second.
Oh.
You're just gravitating back toward like what you're working your way out of, which is inherent shame, right? That's a generational thing that you're trying to, you're on an active journey to work out of, that's not your first response. And I say that because it's important for all of us to acknowledge, though I might be in this environment right now and seem like the strong one, you get out of this environment and there are things that my DNA or energy like naturally are more weak with. And one that I already acknowledged is like expressing my emotions, because I was raised in an environment where like guys don't cry and you don't express it because you're weak type of thing. But getting to that person that, you know, feels really down and out, right now, or feels like everything is not working, the best thing that I can say to you is, first of all, don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle or end, or you're always going to be discouraged. That is a temptation that is real for all of us, to look at another person's middle or end and say, I'm never going to get there.
Well, or don't compare your middle to someone else's beginning. I mean, who's to say where?
Sure.
Because if somebody's listening to this and they're 75 years old,
Yeah.
they're not feeling like they're at the beginning.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, that the same mentality has to exist from both ends, because life tends to flip on you, and whereas you're strong in one moment or feel young and vibrant in one moment, you don't necessarily feel that way another time. But for the person that finds themselves in that scenario where you feel like more is happening against you, or that things just can't get right, my first piece of advice would be get out of the comparison game, because it's just a distraction and it's not going to serve you. The second thing that I would say is you would be very surprised at how your life can change in just one day. I know it doesn't feel that way. I know some of you feel like you've been going at it for a long time, and I know those seasons. And in some ways feel like I'm there myself, that I've been doing something a certain way, waiting for the results. But the other thing that I would say to you is play the 1 degree game, where every day you just try to add 1 degree of positivity to your life, and don't worry about the negative things. And Wayne, I forget his last name, like he was a pastor of a mega church in Hawaii, and he wrote that book that I've referred to of Leading on Empty. And what he says in that book, and I read it probably 10 years ago, it is just everything is an add or a minus in your life. And so if you are in a situation where you're drawing negativity to yourself on a regular basis, start with, how do I increase the positive vibe in my relationships, in the food that I eat, in the environments that I hang out in the way that I get rest? Like, you have to start somewhere. And even if you reach out, you can reach out to us and we can try to help you here. We can give you some advice, but it's like with one of my children that struggle with anxiety and fear, with school, same math test, we started giving him a whole food supplement, that it's a night and day difference when he's taking this standard process product that we got from Body Garage Dayton. It literally is a night and day difference, because every part of our brain and every part of our body has a certain level of hertz, vibrations per second, that it's supposed to vibe at. And so like your hypothalamus, your pituitary, your adrenal glands, those are all responsible for your feelings about your environment. Well, we live in a day and age where our food does not give us all of the nutrition that we need for those things. And so if you're trying to up your vibe, you might need to start with analyzing what I'm eating. The worse I feel, we tend to want to put food that is not good for us in our body, which leads to feeling worse, which leads to wanting food that is not good for us. And that's another part of the problem with poverty. Like, people that are living in poverty do not have access to healthy food that can increase, what is called the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal glands. And that all comes down to, we actually live in circles that work as a funnel, that everything is connected. And so if we try to address behavior without addressing biology, you can't change the behavior. And so for the person that is stuck and you feel like you can't get up and out of where you're at, you can walk 10,000 steps today and drink, half of your body weight in water, ounces of water. You can, at least make a phone call and seek help, to start putting more positive people than negative people in your life. And that all requires confronting uncertainty and just saying, like, I need help in taking steps toward positive environments, positive people, positive food, positive thoughts and feelings in my life.
Getting choked up?
I guess.
Finally.
I'm working on this.
Jeez.
In real time.
I have a friend who, out in the Seattle area, and she's old. She's probably in her 60s. But she's had...
Hey, old friend, if you're listening.
She has had horrible, horrible, horrible back problems. She's had multiple surgeries. And her last surgery, I guess it worked, but the doctor said that she could expect to improve 1% a week. And so she told me that. She's like, I'm going to experience 1% improvement every week. And I was like, oh, that sucks. I'm sorry. Sure. That's a really slow road. And she was so amped about it. She's like, I'm going to feel better by 1% every single week, which means that in 2 years, I'm going to feel 100% better than I do right now. Yeah. And that perspective, like, was mind blowing to me. It just changed everything, where it's like, oh yeah, okay, for somebody that's lived 50 something years with this debilitating pain, 2 years, like, that's nothing. Yeah. She celebrates the 1% every single week. And I think those, like, we do not pay enough attention or give enough credit to slow growth when it comes to our emotional, physical, spiritual health.
Well, and slow growth is the only growth. There is no other growth. Now, it might all come together in a moment and you think, oh, wow, I've grown. But, like, take the example on the massage table. I've been chasing this energy thing for 20 plus years. You know what I mean? And it's, especially with entrepreneurs, it's easy to look at an entrepreneur and be like, oh man, he is successful or she is successful. They say every overnight success is 10 years in the making. I think it's 20 years. And you'll never know or see the blood, sweat, and tears that somebody puts in, you know, to get things done. And it's very easy for me to look at somebody and be like, oh man, they're successful, or oh man, they're doing it right, or oh man, they're really lucky. You have no idea the time that they have put in to get to where they are. You know, and there are, you know, times and seasons where I purposefully try to do the impossible in order just to stretch myself, to have a different level of awareness. I'm not competing against anyone. Every once in a while, I have the chance to speak to, like, an entrepreneurs group or students or whatever. And, you know, often when you're criticized by people that are comparing themselves to you. For whatever reason, I don't compare myself to anyone. I like watching other people and learning from them to see if I can change. But, you know, when we were doing the hospital visits a couple of weeks ago, my dad was in town and from Nashville, and we all went out for dinner on a Saturday night. And the thought came across my mind, and it's been this way for the last 15 years as I have communicated publicly on Sunday mornings. The thought was like, it's going to be a challenging Saturday night, because whereas I normally like to stay home and produce, you know, work on and think about my content, I'm going to go to dinner. And so went to dinner, sat there, and then I had this thought, like, I want to challenge myself to try to, like, go deeper and see things that I've never seen before, because the longer you live, if you don't push the boundaries of what you think you see, what you think you can do, and what you think you know, you'll end up getting stuck. And so I went home, and we had been drinking, you know, not a ton, but enough that I didn't feel like working on my message. But I forced myself to sit down. I worked on it an hour, and then I thought, you know what? It's cold, and I don't want to do it, but I'm going to go run 5 miles. And I went out on this long route, and I think it was 11 o'clock that I started. It takes me a little less than an hour to run the 5 miles. And I'm like, okay, I did that. And now when I was on my run, I saw a picture of the young lady at the hospital beside her husband's bed in that intensive care unit. I'm like, well, I'm going to go out and do a visit. You know, it's like midnight. I'm going to leave the house at midnight, and I'm going to go do the visit. And I did. And she was there by the bed. And then I came back to the house and worked on my message, and it's like 1:30 or 2 in the morning. And I knew I wasn't going to have a lot of energy to come in and communicate publicly. But like, I also told myself, if I can just get the energy up to do that, then I have the rest of the day to like recover. And I did all of those things, and I didn't do as well as I wanted to. Like, I didn't have the energy that I wanted to when I communicated publicly that morning. It was fine, but like, I learned a ton, because what I wanted to do, even if I completely dropped the ball that Sunday morning in communicating publicly, like, I purposely wanted to stretch the boundaries as to what I thought I could do in order to see what happened. What I wasn't after was the win of I did this, I did this, I did this, and I did them all great. What was the win for me was what is possible, what is physically possible. You and I follow David Goggins, who's a former Navy SEAL that wrote that book, You Can't Hurt Me, on Instagram. And like, he had a friend that he was visiting in Florida, and his friend said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to do this 200-mile like challenge where you just go 200 miles." And David Goggins was like, I don't have the clothes or the shoes, but like, I'm gonna do it with you. And this guy had been training for this. David Goggins, jogs, but he wasn't training for 200 miles. And like, he's on Instagram documenting his journey the whole way, where like his feet are bleeding and all of this stuff. But he purposely wanted to confront the boundaries, because the longer you live and the more you take on, the harder it is to confront these boundaries that say you can't do anymore, you can't accomplish anymore. And so the reason I tell that story about myself, and I mentioned David Goggins, is because for the person right now that is stuck and you're attracting a lot of negative things to yourself, where you probably need to start with is confronting the lie that things will always be this way and they can't change. And just a little bit of energy that says, you know what, just because I've been held back up to this point doesn't mean that it always has to be this way. I can put a little bit of faith in myself. And even if I'm trapped in poverty and struggling every single day to put food on the table, maybe it starts with believing that things can change. And I can find one small area where I can add a degree, of positivity for this week, and live into that, believing that maybe that 1 degree will turn into 2 degrees the next week.
It's good. Very practical. Are we done? I think that's good advice. What, was my answer not satisfying?
Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Okay. For episode 51 here at Emotionships, the podcast. Mal's done. Until next time.